as the Spartan Apella shouted yes to war with Athens, and as Potidaea was under siege by the Lacedaemonians, the Delian and Peloponnesian leagues, each full of their intrigue and backstabbing, entered a titanic clash that brought epic battles and endless suffering, called the Peloponnesian War. What happened in the first phases of the Peloponnesian War? How did Athens and Sparta use their different strengths against each other? And how did iconic moments like the funeral oration unfold? Welcome to our video on the first phase of the Peloponnesian War and its consequences. Even back then, war was mostly a case of waiting for something to happen for the average soldier, and actually so is quite a lot of regular life today, so take advantage of a special offer we have for you right now from our sponsor Raycon. They were able to produce the Raycon Everyday Earbuds, high-end wireless earbuds at a low-end price, so low in fact you can get more than one pair and be covered in case you lose them. These wireless earbuds deliver the quality of expensive competitors with useful extra features like noise isolation for close listening and awareness mode for checking in on the world, meaning you can use Raycons anytime, anywhere, and keep your favorite music, podcasts, or even dare we say it, Kings and Generals videos flowing along with you. It really makes traveling, chores, exercising, or pretty much anything better if you can keep learning and having fun, we can assure you of that. Raycons come with a portable base station for charging whenever you need it, and swappable tips to fit on the buds so that they won't fall out. Our producer has been using Raycons for 2 years and absolutely loves them, and now we'll give you the chance to get some for yourself at a discount. Go to buyraycon.com/KNG, where on top of free domestic shipping and flat fee international shipping, you'll get 15% off your Raycon purchase. The Peloponnesian War was a decades-long, multi-part conflict, the first phase of which is often referred to as the Archidamian War, a name stemming from the Spartan king Archidamos, who initiated it after the Apella's decision. This phase of the conflict lasted from 431 to 420 BCE. Thucydides describes its causes and conditions. Sparta technically initiated the conflict, but many Greek poleis were on their side, as they saw the Athenians as an emerging superpower to fear. Sparta itself claimed to be a liberator of Hellas from Athenian imperialism, a sort of defender of the free world. Meanwhile, Athens proclaimed itself to be a defender of democracy against repressive oligarchies. This mutual finger-pointing, so reminiscent of the Cold War of the 20th century, hid cynical geopolitical agendas. It should be noted that due to Thucydides' thorough habit of describing wars year by year, historians are blessed to have a comprehensive and reliable primary source that allows us to follow this conflict's incredibly complex shifting alliances pretty easily. The Peloponnesian League began the war by invading Attica, Athens' breadbasket. Almost every year throughout the war, the Spartans and their allies would invade this region in a scorched earth policy to starve out Athens. In retaliation, Athens blocked the Gulf of Corinth as a countermeasure. However, this did not stop the burnings in Attica from resulting in many civilian deaths, both from famine and pillaging, and many refugees from the Attican hinterlands fled behind the walls of Athens proper for protection. Immediately, Pericles began to face attacks from many angry Athenians, who questioned why he had dragged them into this war. Pericles tempered their panic by advising that their war would be won by strategy, and that their indomitable navy would be able to win the day, so long as they could avoid engaging the Spartans in ground combat, where the Spartan hoplites were at their strongest. After a month of the initial pillaging spree, the Spartans and their allies returned home to participate in the harvest, as was the custom. Thus given a reprieve, at the end of this year, the city of Athens held a public funeral to honor the dead. Pericles recited his iconic Epitaphios Logos, or funeral oration at this funeral. Thucydides takes this opportunity to dissect Pericles' and Athens' ideology. We can see this in the Logos excerpt where Pericles honors the dead as heroes of the Athenian ideal. I would have you day by day fix your eyes upon the greatness of Athens until you become filled with the love of her, and when you are impressed by the spectacle of her glory, reflect that this empire has been acquired by men who knew their duty and had the courage to do it, who in the hour of conflict had the fear of dishonor always present to them, and who, if ever they failed in an enterprise, would not allow their virtues to be lost to their country, but freely gave their lives to her as the fairest offering which they could present at her feast. The sacrifice which they collectively made was individually repaid to them, for they received again each one for himself a praise which grows not old, and the noblest of all tombs. I speak not of that in which their remains are laid, but of that in which their glory survives, and is proclaimed always and on every fitting occasion, both in word and deed. For the whole earth is the tomb of famous men. Not only are they commemorated by columns and inscriptions in their own country, but in foreign lands there dwells also an unwritten memorial of them, graven not on stone, but in the hearts of men. The Logos is remembered as an anti-capitulation song that tries to frame the deaths of Athenians as sacrifices made in the fight for a unique democratic ideal. Unlike the strictly militaristic Spartans, it also frames Athens as heroic for its participation in both mercantile and military affairs. Athenian lifestyle is extolled as outgoing and linked to the sea, and their adventurousness as something to be celebrated. Rather ironically, 1 year after Pericles gave this speech, the plague hit Athens, and Pericles himself died of it. Thucydides respects Pericles in his evaluation as a strong and vanguardist leader. In 429 BCE, the Peloponnesian League tried to shift the Athenian blockade off of the coast of Rhium, a small northwestern Peloponnesian coastal settlement. The Athenian navy was stretched thin at the time, having dispatched troops to both Potidaea in Macedonia and to traditionally Dorian-leaning Crete. Thus, while the Peloponnesian League had sent 47 ships, mostly Corinthian in origin, the Athenians had only 20 ships to stand against them. On the Peloponnesian side, the Navag Cnemos amassed 1,000 hoplites from Sparta, as well as 2,000 hoplites from allied states, to attack a nearby city of Acarnania. In response, the Athenians sent out a team led by a commander called Phormio, the man responsible for controlling the blockades of both Naupactos and Rhium, to lead a direct assault on Rhium. These two battles were set to decide the blockade's fortune. The Rhium and Anti-Rhium are found near the modern city of Patra, where the Peloponnese comes the closest to touching the rest of Hellas at the shortest distance within the isthmus. Hence it was both the easiest to blockade and the most strategic location to attack. The Peloponnesians had a lot of transport ships in their midst, and so decided to use their trireme warships to defend these more vulnerable cargo-bearing vessels as they sailed past the narrow Rhium. Phormio had to decline sending help to Acarnania, but instead focused on the Peloponnesian convoy. Phormio, a major innovator in naval maneuvering, utilized the weather as a key part of his tactics. Seeing the heavily fortified Peloponnesian triremes, he decided to perform an unorthodox tactic. With 20 triremes of his own, he fanned them out to surround the Peloponnesian fleet and began to move ever closer. Approaching slowly, he sent smaller ships forward in a false dash attack to force the Peloponnesian ships into a defensive cluster. The Peloponnesians were incapable of fighting back, though they could have attacked individual ships during their attack. Phormio had noticed that winds blew into the Gulf at dawn, and surmised that they could be used against the Peloponnesians. Just as Phormio had predicted, upon clustering, the Peloponnesians fell victim to the fickle weather, being blown away by the wind and crashing into each other, at which point the Athenians attacked. The Peloponnesian fleet was utterly crushed, with the Athenians capturing 12 ships and destroying the rest. Meanwhile, on the shore, Cnemis had reached the Acarnanian capital of Stratus and split his troops into 3 divisions. The left was manned by Spartans and Ambraciots, and was commanded by Cnemis. The center was made of barbarian mercenaries, and Leucadians and Anacoriets commanded the right. Cnemis himself was keen to encamp the divisions and begin negotiations. However, the center division, hoping for pillage and glory, continued to advance against Cnemis's wishes. They eventually faced the Stratians, only to discover that the defenders were experts in close combat. Thus the barbarians were promptly sent packing. The other divisions were caught by surprise and formed ranks, but the Stratians lacked the forces to defeat them, so they did not press their advantage. However, the next day, Cnemis discovered that the rest of the Acarnanians were sending reinforcements, and thus decided to flee, meeting up with the survivors of the Peloponnesian fleet on the way. In both the naval battle at Rhium and the engagement at Stratia, the Athenians and their allies had emerged as the undisputed victors. The death of Pericles allowed some of the allies who were not too keen on the war, like Lesbos, to try and break away from Athenian domination. These were quickly dealt with, as Athens had an unparalleled fleet at the time, capable of quashing any dissent in its alliance. Mytilene was another city that tried to reject Athenian overlordship, as they managed to back various revolts in Ionia and the nearby islands. We will return to the revolt in due course, but what is important is that Thebes, an ally of Sparta and a keen enemy of Athens, began encroaching upon Plataea. Initially, 300 Theban hoplites approached the city, where 2 oligarchic sympathizers let them in. These 2 Plataeans were hoping for a victory against the newly risen democratic factions in the city. The Plataeans were initially shocked into submission, but then realized their numerical superiority and killed over half of the Thebans, with the rest either captured or escaping. In this dire engagement, the Theban reinforcements could not aid their dying brethren due to the Asopos River flooding. Initially, both sides swore sacred oaths to negotiate the release of the Theban prisoners if Plataea was left alone. We don't know who broke the oaths taken, but the Thebans eventually began to attack again. The Plataeans called for Athenian help, while the Thebans appealed to Sparta. This is technically the official beginning of the Peloponnesian War. Archidamos sent an expeditionary force to burn the farmlands outside Plataea, something the Plataean ambassador reminded the Spartans they were not allowed to do due to the holiness of Plataea. Sparta said they would only agree to protect them if they became neutral, but Plataea, which was very close to Athens in terms of both geography and ideology, rejected said proposal. Athens pushed the Plataeans to avoid agreeing to the terms, making the Plataeans more confident in the fact they could hold out until Athenian aid arrived. Archidamos thus began his work of besieging the city, beginning by constructing a wooden palisade around it. He managed to build a mound leading up to the walls, which he tried to use for an assault over the city walls. The Plataeans countered this measure by extending the height of their walls, while also digging under the walls and burrowing inside the Spartan mound, thus delaying the mound's construction. They also managed to build further fortifications inside the city using the materials from the mound, and thus had an additional means of defense in case of a Spartan breakthrough. The Spartans also built up siege engines, but these were ineffective, as the Plataeans used lassos and fire to disable these instruments of war. The Spartans continued to try to force their way through Plataea's walls for some time, but eventually they decided that it was fruitless and decided to simply sit back, surround the city, and starve it out instead. Their next step was to start throwing fire projectiles into the city proper. A large part of Plataea was destroyed by fire, but the Spartans missed the defensive positions, and thus their bombings only ended up amounting to an archaic form of terrorism. After this failure, the Spartans decided to simply double down on their attempt to starve out the Plataeans. To that end, the Lacedaemonians built a wall of circumvallation around Plataea, and seeing as they did not need most of their troops, dismissed a large part of the besieging force. Blockades are not a nice affair, and soon the Plataeans began to suffer the effects of malnutrition. The Spartan walls essentially were a two-way avenue, with walls outside for Spartan protection and the walls inside to lock off the city, with towers used for scouting and keeping sentries. The Spartans built wooden settlements in between the walls so they could live within the walls, manned by Boeotian allies. According to Thucydides, the Plataeans had before sent off their wives and children and oldest men and the mass of the non-combatants to Athens, so that the number of besieged left in the place comprised 400 of their own citizens, 80 Athenians, and 110 women to bake their bread. This was the sum total at the commencement of the siege, and there was no one else within the walls, bond or free. Such were the arrangements made for the blockade of Plataea. The siege took 2 years and inflicted incredible hardship upon the population within the city. By the winter of 428 to 427 BC, provisions within the city began to grow thin, bringing desperation to the civilian population. The Plataeans decided to try and break out. At first, this was to be an attempt of the entire male population of the city to escape, but half of the garrison then decided that it was too dangerous. In the end, only 220 Plataean soldiers took part. They used ladders to climb over the walls, captured 2 of the 10 towers of the fortification, and managed to get across the outer wall before strong reinforcements could arrive. The Peloponnesian League tried to send 300 men as reinforcements, but by the time of their arrival, the Plataean escapees had fled to Athens. The Plataeans then moved up the road leading to Thebes, deceiving the besiegers who attempted to find them on the road to Athens. Eventually, 212 of the escapees managed to reach Athens. Thucydides claimed that their success was mainly due to the darkness and the storm that was raging during the night. Even though the escapees managed to reach Athens, their pleas for aid fell on deaf ears. The Athenians were continuing to follow Pericles' strategy of avoiding direct ground combat with Sparta, and thus didn't send a relief force to Plataea for fear of being bogged down. By the summer of 427 BCE, the Plataeans and their allies inside the city were totally burnt out and starved, and thus the Spartans began their ominous assault. At this point, the Spartan commander tried to persuade the besieged that it would be better to surrender, that when a peace treaty was eventually negotiated, the Spartans would allow them to keep their land, and that only those who provoked the riot 2 years prior would be punished. The Plataeans agreed to those terms and surrendered. However, the Thebans were bitter and angry at the Plataeans and immediately put pressure on the Spartans to go harder on their vanquished foes. As a result, the Plataeans were brought into a show trial and condemned to death. All 200 Plataean and 25 Athenians who had survived the siege were executed, and the women who had remained in the city to cook for the garrison were sold into slavery. The Thebans took the land for themselves, and to rub salt in the wounds of the tragic city of Plataea, they then burnt the entire city to the ground. Plataea would not be rebuilt until 381 BC, when Philip of Macedon defeated the Thebans. The start of the Peloponnesian War proved to be a bittersweet win for Athens. They had lost their greatest statesman, and then had emerged victorious from important fights against overwhelming odds in the Peloponnese. However, they had also shown an unwillingness to help their allies, something which had cost the Plataeans dearly. The Spartans had had a difficult start to the war. They had been humiliated in Rhium and Naupactos, but had rushed to the aid of Thebes and had delivered a crushing blow to Plataea. These contradictory positions of the 2 great powers would continue for the next decade, with equal levels of machinations and suffering for both sides. This is where we will leave it off for now, but the Archidamian War is far from over, and has many more twists and turns for us to unravel. This series will continue, so to make sure you do not miss it when that video goes live, remember to subscribe and hit the bell button. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently we have started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.